Hello, this is the panel on power and consequences, creating magic with limitations. I've got two panelists with me on this one, and I'll have them introduce themselves. Let's start with Justine.
Hi, I'm Justine Manzano. I am a YA author and a freelance editor, and I am one of the editors in residence. I can't seem to spit that out for any of the panels. One of the editors in residence here at Right Hive.
Hey everyone, my name is Scott Rankin. I am primarily a young adult and middle grade author as well. I write sci-fi, I write fantasy, probably best known for the Nixia trilogy, but I have a younger series, and then I recently had Ash Lords and Bloodsworn was the most recent. It's a duology. But yeah, I'm from North Carolina, and I've been writing for a while. I was a teacher before this, and yeah, I get to be a full-time writer now. I get to make things up for a living. It's a fun gig. So
that is awesome. That's the dream.
Most days it is still very hard, and there's tough days where I look out the window and wonder, what am I doing with my life? But other than that, yes, it is the dream.
Well, I say the dream about getting to stay home and write all the time, but not necessarily the whole industry as a dream.
Sure. That is a fair point. Absolutely.
Awesome, cool. Well, let's just start with essentially breaking down the title of the panel, Power and Consequences. Essentially, what exactly does that have to do with magic? So what do we mean by power and consequences? What are the consequences and what is the power? And do you have any specific examples of this? Anyone, no particular order. You guys can just jump in.
Yeah, I definitely think those are both great things to start thinking about, especially if you're starting with your main character, right? What position are they in at the very start of the story? What power do they have? And if we're talking about magic, if we're talking about science, whatever it might be, what do they have access to? If it's science, like what technology do they have or not have? What are they being invited into that's new? So my Nixia trilogy, which is right here, in this series, they are mining and using a substance called Nixia. It's a creatively manipulable substance that sort of can change with a thought, right? So once you have your hands on that, that's a really powerful substance for you to use. But if you don't have that, you lack that power. So I always think it's a great place to start in, just figuring out what power your character has, what power can they eventually obtain, and who are the other people who are up at those tiers of power that they'll have to face if they want some of that power. I think those are all great questions to be thinking about.
And I think on the consequence end, the idea of what happens to hold your main character back from obtaining further power, and then also how that power affects the character and their growth, and how difficult it is for them to acquire further power, because I think those consequences of the actions that they take as with those powers can add a lot of conflict to a story.
Yeah, and I think there's the funny thing about power and consequences too is we can mean a bunch of different things, right? Consequences can be, okay, now that you've elevated to this level of magic, all of a sudden you have a lot more responsibility because this whole section of the city now thinks that you're supposed to serve them in a certain way. Wow, that's a lot of consequence. Or we could literally mean, hey, every time you use a spell, you knock 2 days off of your life. That's a consequence, right? And that's a dangerous consequence. And you have to figure out exactly how much of that spell you want to use if it's going to mean that consequence. So I think there's a lot to play with for the reader and for the writer.
I agree.
Nice. So my next question is going with the limitations of magic. Why is it important to have those limitations?
I think that if you are dealing with a world in which everything occurs very easily, and magic can definitely make it feel like things can happen very easily, you end up with a boring story. Because if everything comes easily, then there is no conflict. If a character is stuck somewhere, they can magic their way out, and you never have to really consider what that means or how that affects anybody around them or themselves. So that you end up stuck in kind of a boring tale where you can pull a magical idea out of your behind and make the world work, make the ending work, and rather it feels less earned, I think.
Yeah, that Deus Ex Machina thing will bite you quick. And I think limitations are about a bunch of things. So first, it's setting the expectation of the reader, right? Hey, this is how far we know that this can go. And then the good part about that, I think, is we expect that to be the arena we're playing in. But then every now and again, when someone exceeds that or goes past it, then we're like, whoa, wait, how'd they do that spell? How'd they use this science? And so I think it lets you play with how to break the rules too. But in terms of limitations, so a great example in this series, I'm working with Phoenix horse racing, right? It's a really fun concept. Basically, horses that live and die all in one day, right? And the magic comes in that at the end of the day, when the horse dies, they burst into flames, they become ashes, and the riders can mix, it's kind of like alchemy. They can mix different powders to summon different horses back to life at sunrise, and they can change the characteristics, right? So if we look ahead on the day's race and we think, well, I want a horse that has armored shoulders, or I want a horse that glows in the dark because there's a tunnel ahead. I can kind of come up with those different magics. Now, I can't make it so that a horse that flies is going to ruin the race, right? So there have to be limitations in place that keep the story interesting and that make it so that okay, sure, there's all these different horses you can make, but you can only make them if you have X amount of ingredients, or you can only make them if you're that talented as an alchemist, because that's a really hard spell to pull off. So I think those limitations keep the story grounded, and it keeps it in the realm of the reader still wants to lean in and find out what's going on, because it doesn't feel unrealistic. Like Justine mentioned, it doesn't feel like it's just drifting off into nowhere, basically.
And you want to make sure that like you were saying about setting expectations, you can end up with I'm trying to think of a way to say what I'm trying to say. You ever have that feeling like you just the words, they are not there?
Yeah, no worries.
I'm so much better writing.
That's why we do what we do.
Exactly. But when you said that you want to have those moments where they exceed the expectations of the reader, and those things, you can have those, but you have to make sure that they make sense, that there is a reason that that's possible, because I think that a lot of times it's just you end up stuck in the anime world of, and then they got stronger.
Right.
I do love that, but
I do love power-ups. Yeah, I'm here for the over 9,000. Yeah.
But it's okay, but why? Okay, but okay, and now all of a sudden he can fight like a god. I don't understand what happened.
There's a really good example. So I kind of when you have layers to the magical system or layers to the tech. So right above here you can see is The Last Sun. It's by Katie Edwards. It's really a brilliant. It's the best urban fantasy I've ever read. It's brilliant. And one of the things that Katie does in the story is there's this standard magic system. They use sort of different items that contain certain spells. You release the spells. It's sigil magic of some kind. Sigil. I've never known how to say that word, and that's cool. But every now and again we get the level up moment, and it makes sense in this world. They have these things called aspects, where it's this one spell comes out of him. This one particular spell is triggered by certain moments, and it's the difference between here's my standard magic I wield, and then there's those moments where I can hit you with this. And I think that's the difference, is giving us those limitations that are standard, and then letting your character outshine them just from time to time to keep the story kind of moving and keep us leaning in.
There's in the book that I recently released, The Order of the Key, there is there's the magic system in place, and part of the mystery is why this character can, when she works with one specific other person in the team that they're working with, can be stronger. And they don't know how right away. They don't know what they're doing, but when they really need to get something done and they team up, it's just that much more effective. And so that becomes a part of the question, okay, but why is this person so important? And why is this person boost her that way? And so when you're throwing in unexpected things like that, and also like working to like stretch the limitations without completely shattering them and then running away, like like I feel like it's there's the ability to do that, there's the danger of doing that, so you have to be very careful in making sure you limit what exactly they can do and how they can break those rules, and why, and not like run away with it and let it be easy. If it's too easy, it's not going to work.
Right. And that what you're saying too hits at the core of two very important, I think, reader rewards, right? That's the way I think of them. So clarity and mystery. Those are two things we want as readers as we go along. We want moments where we're like, oh, like I learned this new world building thing in this world. But we also want moments where we're like, ooh, how does that work? Like, I just saw that spell, but we don't know the story behind that yet. And so when you have that particular dynamic, I think you can give the reader like moments where we're like, oh, I've unlocked the key. I feel like I used that magic. I know how it works. But then there's this, I always, Dumbledore, right? Dumbledore is like the ultimate example of this, where it's like, we know how the magic system works in Harry Potter. Like you say a word, a phrase goes, like that's how it goes down. And then Dumbledore, every time he comes on the page, is like whisking us away into some other realm of magic. We're like, wait, we don't know that spell. He didn't say anything. Like it's really great moments where we see sort of some of that mystery, some of that clarity. Both of those things are important. So
Awesome. Well, I feel like you guys have already pretty much answered the next question I had, so I'll put a pin in that one for now. And it also feels like a great transition for the next one anyway, since you've already started talking about how you kind of need your characters to be limited in their magic. Is there ever a time where you don't want them to be, or when it would work well to not have them, not necessarily not limited, but less limited, if anything?
I think, one of the things I think about, Brandon Sanderson talks about this whenever, writing excuses, they talk about just moments of cool, right? You really have to give us moments where we feel like something exceptional has occurred. And you can set that up with the rules you give us to make us feel like, wow, we just entered new territory. Something that leaves our jaw on the floor is never a bad thing. So, back to my fun Phoenix horses, like obviously, the whole first book is about this big epic race and all these different horses they use. And I really explore that magic. And I knew in book 2 I had to take that and level it up somehow. And I won't get into how I did that, but I literally spent most of my time before writing book 2 figuring out how could I take that established magic and twist it in a new direction that really has the reader going, oh, of course we were going to head here. But it feels natural, but I didn't think about it, and now we're entering new territory. I think that's always important to have those moments for your characters.
There should always be more for them to learn. I feel like, when you're coming into something and you have the basic knowledge that your main character has, but there are other people out in that world, and there are other ways to find new and interesting ways to twist things, like you were saying. And that, I think, grows not only the world of your story, but it also can grow interest in what's happening. It can help build that mystery and make people, want to invest in more. Like, I now want to know what you did to level up your magic system there.
It's really fun. I think I agree. And I think, one of the things I always think about it, my wife and I have talked about this before, like kind of like the Top Chef mentality. Shows like that, we tune in because we get to see some of the best people doing their best work at something. And I think that's always entertaining to see a high skill level. Now, you have to make your characters earn that, right? You don't want them just to waltz in and be the most skilled person in the room. And that's where, you have them seem very skilled, and then in the third scene, someone knocks them down several pegs. Like, those moments are crucial too. But I think there is something to kind of like the promise of the premise, right? Which is, hey, I promised you Phoenix horses. And so if I don't flash the coolest Phoenix horse trick ever by page whatever, you're going to feel like I didn't deliver the thing I promised you in the pitch. And so I think doing that through your character, leveling them up, getting to that moment of here is where I shine is super important.
Nice. So then on next question, on the flip side of characters having less limits, is it possible to create any limits, to have a system that's too limited?
I believe so. I think you can accidentally handcuff your characters if you work too hard on creating limitations that make it impossible for them to move through their story. That I think kind of gets dictated by plot more than anything. I think you need to, when you're planning out everything, you need to kind of look at what you need them to accomplish and how they can get there. And if the restrictions you put on the magic system are so difficult that they can't muddle through it, now you have a problem where you can't tell your story. So when you're planning, and I feel like magic systems, although I think I said this once every panel, but if you're, whether you're planning or like whether you're a pantser or a plotter as an author, you have to go back and look at it from now. After you've written your first draft, you have to go back and now reread it and find those moments where you're going, okay, this is beyond what I've allowed in my magic system. Why? And do I have to change my magic system to incorporate it? Or can I find another way around this limit that I'm having a problem with? And if you can't tell your story because you've gotten so tight with your restrictions, then it's time to probably open up some of them.
Yeah, and not even just can't tell your story, but sometimes it's also just, can you keep your story interesting, right? If you tighten the rules so much that when you get to book 2 or book 3, there's no variance, there's no room to grow, then you've kind of, like you said, you kind of hamstrung yourself. So you get into a situation where you can't make book 2 any more compelling or interesting, or you have to almost like force it that way, and then it feels like the author's hand is at work as opposed to natural organic growth of the story and the world. The other thing I think about too is like, limitations are great, right? But if you limit your characters so much that they are so weak that you kind of can't ever believe they'll succeed or that their magic will matter, that's also a problem, where you get to a point in the story where you're like, I don't think this character would win. Like, it's not a spoil. I mean, this series has been out forever, and in Harry Potter, like, there is a part of me that like struggles with the final book and with what Harry does in the final book, because I'm like, I get like the heart behind it, but dude, you didn't level up, you didn't skill up, and I had a hard time believing some of what he was able to do in that final book because he never seemed to earn that. And I say that is like that book 3 is what made me a reader. So it's one of those things though that I think you just have to look at, is your character worth following, and is your story going to continue opening doors that are interesting, right?
Nice. Well, I have opinions on why Harry Potter was able to do those things at the end, but that's a whole different conversation.
I totally get it. Like, I have been able to justify it, and I accept the ending. There's just parts of me that I'm like, I do wish there had been a more vibrant skill set too. But
I also feel like maybe they followed the wrong hero in that story. But
absolutely.
Yeah, it should have been Hermione. Yeah, but
Hermione, exactly.
And that,
Hermione.
I mean, I guess it also, Hermione maybe was too good at what she did, and so that would be less interesting because you wouldn't get to see her grow.
She would have been awesome. I would have read on Hermione all day. But yeah.
Absolutely. Now, from a writer standpoint, trying to build this world with a balanced magic system, how can they tell, or how can any writer tell, if the magic, power, and consequences are well balanced within their world? Are there any specific red flags or anything, or is it more of an overarching issue that someone might see? How do you see that?
Beta readers help. I mean, that 100. Like, I'm in a great writing group with Katie Edwards, with a handful of other published authors, and they certainly guide me well when they're like, oh, this magic feels flat, or this magic came out of nowhere. My favorite thing to think about, and again, it's something that The Last Sun does just extraordinarily well, is levels to the magic. Like, there are very clearly established, like, hey, we know our main character's here and a lot of people are beneath him, but then there's the arcana who are above him, at least for now. And then there's the principalities who we're not really sure where they are. Some of them are stronger, some of them are not. Like, and I think there's something about that where we know our person isn't necessarily the biggest stick walking into the room, so to speak. Like, he's not always going to win every fight, but we get that there's a balance to the power where he is better than some, or she is better than some, but they also have a way to go. Like, so I think that's one way to look at it. And I also just think, try to make sure that it's not just this one magic system and that's all there is in the world, right? There should be other forces at play, other politics, other dynamics, that even if this magic is really powerful, well, you still have to stop that army that has nothing to do with magic over there. Those things can kind of balance the world out too.
I 100% agree. I think that there is also, like, I have in my story in the Order of the Key, there's a hierarchy of what magic is allowed to be used by who, or what abilities, because it's more abilities in this. It's a little more superhero-y than straight up magic, but it's what can be used by whom and what purpose they're supposed to use it for. So, like, you have the keys. The keys are the people who are, like, sort of revered, and then you have the guardians who have similar power sets but are not allowed to use them in the same way, and their whole job is to protect the keys and possibly die trying. And so you want to make sure that if you have something like that, that it makes sense why they follow it too, because, and when to break it, and just sort of use it in your world and create, like, an entire world around it where it makes sense how the world has been affected by the changes or the magic that has come into it. Why is it different than our world? What made it develop that way, and why? So it is very much a world building exercise in making sure that you know it's not all the magic, like you said. It's everything surrounding it and how the magic is used in those environments and why. Also feed into the story. But like you were saying, beta readers, CPs,
So helpful. Yeah.
yes, and just being, like I said, understand that you may not get that balance right out of the gate. Be prepared to rewrite and tweak and move the goalpost a little bit for yourself so that you can get there, because it almost, like, I mean, I think in my first draft of that story, half of the things that they could do, they can't do anymore. Because I was like 100% rule of cool and like 0% logic at first, and just like spat everything out on the page, like, and she can, like, bring down thunder and just going for it. And then I realized, I was like, well, okay, so how is she beatable, and how is their tension, and why doesn't she do stuff like this all the time? And eventually I ended up just chopping out, like, huge chunks of their abilities and finding a better middle ground where it wasn't so over the top cool, I guess, and had a reason and felt more organically built too. And so, like, you just be prepared to, like, mess with it a lot, because it doesn't ever come out, I feel like, the first time where you 100% know where you're going with it right out of the gate and write it perfectly in that first draft. Like, usually it ends up being moved around a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a willingness to poke holes in things to yourself and be like, if she can do that, why can't she do this? People, and again, I think beta readers help with those logical questions too. It's interesting. One of the things that you kind of hit on for me, and some of what I really struggled with, and I struggle with every time in my early drafts, is I get so excited that I want to throw everything in the kitchen sink into the story. And often that waters down the storytelling. It does not make it stronger. It makes it convoluted and it kind of clogs. And so if you really can pinpoint and focus on what's going to make the story shine. So and this was initially it was like the whole concept was going to be 4 different races through 4 different dimensions. And I was like, that's a cool concept. I think that's fun. And every single beta reader was like, these Phoenix horses are really cool. And I was like, okay, like what about worlds 1, 3, and 4? And they're like, the Phoenix horses are really cool. So I was like okay, fine. But like that was me cutting 3 of the 4 worlds I wrote about, and then adding 2 more characters and focusing on this world. And so I think there's just something to that of like finding the thing that really fits your story and focusing on it and honing in on it, rather than feeling like, let me throw this magic and that magic and there's another magic. Like sometimes it's just about figuring out the right thread to keep pulling, and we're interested enough in that.
100% agree.
Cool. I don't know how you managed to cut out 3 universes out of 4. That sounds painful.
One of them slips back in. One of them slips back in book 2. The
Nice.
world of the gods, the underworld, is still present. So
I was gonna say, I think you have like a whole bunch of other books that you can like throw out later, and you know, like
there was one really cool, like a post-apocalyptic, like in 1929, instead of like the stock market crash, it was the dimensional crash, and it's just like other dimensions just crashed into ours, and it was a really fun wasteland of a world. And maybe I'll get there one day. Maybe.
Yeah, you could totally do that in a different book. Maybe.
Well, that's its own story. That's awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like such a good story.
It was really fun. It was really fun. But someone at some point was just like, "What is this? Like, are you just throwing everything?" So yeah, you know, one day.
It is tempting to throw in all the races, all the magic, all of it at once, because you get all the ideas, and it's like, well, then why not?
It feels so cool too, and that's where, you know, you don't have the distance. Everything you write kind of feels a little cool, and so when you have that other voice come in and say, "This is the cool part," if you didn't know, and you're like, "Oh, okay, thank you."
And it's also important to like be able to, like you were saying, to be able to ask yourself the whys. Don't be afraid to be a toddler, and just why yourself to death. Oh, this thing happens. Why? Okay, but because this has to happen, but why? And just do that to, you know, do that to your big plot points when you're particularly when you know something's not working and you can't figure out what it is about it that isn't gelling. But yeah, like you were saying about wanting to, because you get so excited and you want to throw everything in. I think like save yourself other things to write.
That's
I know
true.
I've done it before. Like I've tried to do all of the stories I ever wanted to do in the one book, and then I was like, okay, well, this is it's jam-packed to the point of ridiculousness, and nothing actually happens because everything's happening at once. And there's also the fact that you can tell that story later. You can you can find another way to make it work. I always say to create a dump doc on your it's super useful, and anything you don't use, throw it in there, and you can look it over later when you're looking for story ideas, and maybe it'll trigger something, and that you can and also time helps, that you can make a whole new world out of that idea you had, and not let it clog up the story you're working on right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like I do that, and I think for a part, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm like giving advice against my own advice, but one of the ways I start with story concepts is actually when I have that main thread, that one idea that's like, oh, that's the idea. What I will go down, as I keep all my ideas on my iPhone, which is not what the reminder section is for, but it's where I keep them. And I have thousands of ideas there, and I will go through and try and pull any idea that feels like it might mesh, so that I can kind of texture the rest of that world. And I might pull 15 things, and 2 of them might make it into the story, but at least I'm kind of taking from that larger sort of like swath of ideas and kind of bringing them into the story as they fit.
A lot of times that's what just makes the story work, is when you combined. I've played puzzle pieces before too, and I had a story where I like to write very strange things and do not know how to write like standard contemporary work. I've just
Welcome to the club.
So I came up with this idea for a contemporary work and was like blinking at it, and it's a book that's coming out soon called Never Say Never. And I had this idea about this girl who who was enduring her parents' divorce and no longer believed in love. And I was like, I had tried to write it a few times and it was sort of like, okay, it's all right, it's whatever, and just couldn't get into it. And I love the characters, but there was something missing. And then I was sort of doing that where I was like, I've always wanted to write a story about this. I've always wanted, and Greek mythology came up as one of them. And I was like, Aphrodite. And threw her into the story, and it became a story about Aphrodite in, disguised as another teenager, basically torturing this poor girl into trying to find love. And that's what the story is now. Never Say Never is really like, Aphrodite saying challenge accepted when she says she'll never fall in love. And
yeah.
And that's exactly it. It was puzzle pieces. It was never, it wouldn't work without the right extra ingredient.
Right. I love that.
Cool. So my next question is a pretty good geek out question. So what are some of your favorite examples of magic systems that use limitations and or consequences?
Oof. I'm trying to think. That's a hard one.
Well, mine is the Epic series from Brendan Sanderson, and he has it's pretty much about evil, like supervillains taking over the world, but they're the main one in the first book, which is Steelheart, is very Superman like. And it's just like, and if Superman was evil, what would happen? And the interesting thing is the understanding that these people, as you go through the story, and this is, I don't think, a major spoiler, but as you go through the story, you realize that the characters start out wanting to be superheroes when they get these abilities, and that as they use their abilities more and more, they become more and more evil. And it's just a side effect of using the abilities that they've been given. So it's really about managing that. Like if they can find a way to balance that somehow, then they can actually make sure that new people that crop up with abilities don't become that way. And all the while they're trying to fight the ones that already have and find a way to stop them. So it's a really interesting series, but I love the idea of that corrupting in such a way, like where they don't even realize it's happening, that they're slowly losing their humanity as they use the abilities.
Yeah, I love that. I have never read those, and I know he's so known for like his magic systems and all that. I think he on a podcast recently, he was like, I'm the magic system guy, basically. The one that comes to mind is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I just love because what the origins in that can kind of control. Basically, I don't even really fully know. I'm thinking about what they do. It's like kind of like they're controlling and feeling and working with what's underground, and that comes out in a weird way where they can freeze people to death basically in a heartbeat. But the cool thing to me is like she did such a good job of weaving their role into the story. Like they are pivotal to the survival of this world, and yet they're hated by the society because of what they do. And yet like there's these folds to the fact that these people have this particular magic that are just so inherent to everything in the plot. It's really nicely done. So that one's the one that comes to mind.
Nice. So I think we have time for one more question. So if it's a soft magic system that someone wants to write, are limitations still necessary?
Yes, you need to know them. No, the reader doesn't need to know them. So I think you should definitely have a sense, like if you're just like, well, like no one's gonna know, the inconsistencies are just inevitable. Versus if you're like, I generally think this is how it works, this is how you draw power, this is what happens, but I'm only gonna share 10% of that with the reader. That's okay. I think you do need to know what's going on in your story.
think it's like anything where you have a background to it and you don't necessarily need to share everything. So, just like you wouldn't tell, every experience of the character's childhood that made them how they are. You may share something about a key moment in their past, but everything else kind of stays hidden underneath, that you can bring up at times that it makes sense, and without bombarding the readers with those ideas.
Yeah, and the limitations can be shown in different ways if you want to keep the magic system soft where it's not fully explained. I think of the Tombs of Atuan, Ursula K. Le Guin's second story with Jed. I've never known how to say that name. I read him as a kid, but that in that story, like, we don't really know what he's doing, but we know he's doing magic stuff because he's like probing and he's got like a staff thing going on, and like we know he's doing something, we just don't know what it is. And then she really shows us limitation through there's these great vulnerable moments of weakness where he's like, look, I'm doing everything I can to not let the roof cave in on us right now. You have to help me with this because I can't even focus on walking. You need to guide me. And so there's this great moments where the limitations are present, they're just not explained in a hardcore magic system, and that's totally fine.
Cool. Well, I think that's about it for us. I know you guys have to get going soon. Before we end the recording, is there anything either of you wanted to plug or any final closing you wanted to put out?
We should probably mention our books again.
Yeah.
So I didn't talk much about, I didn't hold them up or anything earlier, but the Nixia trilogy is my sci-fi book series. It's all 3 books are out there. So if you're a binge reader like me and you want to dive in without hesitation, all 3 are available. Some kind of Hunger Games in space. It's 10 kids who get recruited to go into space, find themselves in a competition, and have to kind of win the rights to these $1 million contracts that they're offered. I mentioned Ash Lords, I mentioned Bloodsworn. This is a duology, so it's also complete. It's also done. You don't have to wait. Both books are out in the world. Phoenix Horse Racing, a lot of fun. And then for younger readers, it's kind of like right over my shoulder right here. But I have a series that starts with Saving Fable and Escaping Ordinary. So if we have any younger readers, or if any of the people who are watching have younger readers at home, it's a series about a young girl named Indira who is a character in training. So she's literally training to be a character in a book and fails her auditions and is told she can only ever be a side character. So we follow her through her first year of school where she tries to prove everyone wrong. And yeah, those are my books. Thanks for listening, y'all.
I love that.
Really
And I do have a young reader at home, so I think I may have to pick that up. That's pretty great. I have 2 books out. Well, 1 book out now, and that's The Order of the Key, and that will have has sequels oncoming. And then I have I have the book that I was talking about with Aphrodite, which is Never Say Never, which comes out in June. And there's more to come. And if you're ever in the Right Hive Discord, I have my own little corner of the world that I answer questions about editing, and you can always stop by in there. It's the Word Nerd Cafe, and the Table Justine is mine. And just my website, www.justinemanzano.com, where you can learn about all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, on Instagram, places like that. If you're ever looking to find out more about books or want to ask questions about author life or anything like that, I'm in those spaces. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me here to talk about this stuff. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. And thanks for everyone for watching.
Thanks for moderating. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you did great.
My pleasure.